Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. I have some news for you. A while back, I asked where you'd prefer ads, and you know what? The response was clear. Most of you said no ads at all would be better. So I've made a decision. I've turned off monetization completely. From now on, it's ad-free, just like when I started this channel. If you do see any ads, that's YouTube placing them automatically, not me. From my side, no interruptions, just pure storytelling. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. I've gone back and forth in my mind about whether to ever talk about this. For a long time, I convinced myself it wasn't worth sharing. It sounded too strange, too dramatic, and too easy for people to dismiss. I've also spent years trying to convince myself that none of it meant anything at all. But the memories have never faded, and if I'm honest, they never quite sit right either. So now feels like as good a time as any to finally tell it. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, my family lived in a house my father built himself. It was out in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, surrounded by open land and long stretches of quiet. There were no nearby neighbors, no streetlights, and no real sense of connection to the outside world. At night, it was pitch black. During the day, it felt isolated but peaceful. At least, that's how it felt at first. My parents owned a small business, and even though we lived far from town, they would sometimes bring clients to the house. Looking back, it seems odd, but at the time, it felt normal to me. Over the years, a lot of different people passed through our home. Most of them were fine, some were a little strange, but one man stood out in a way that still makes my skin crawl. The first time I saw him, I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. He arrived in a black car with dark-tinted windows. I remember watching from inside as he pulled up, already feeling nervous for reasons I didn't understand. He stepped out wearing all black. Black clothes, a black hat, dark sunglasses. Even indoors, he never took them off. His presence felt heavy, like the air changed when he entered the house. As a kid, I didn't have the words to describe why he scared me. I just knew that I didn't like being near him. I remember hiding behind furniture or staying close to my parents whenever he was around. He spoke calmly, politely even, but something about him felt wrong. It wasn't just me either. Everyone in the house seemed uncomfortable, even if they tried not to show it. One thing that really stood out was how interested he was in our cat. We had a black Persian cat named Mercedes. She was gentle, affectionate, and very attached to our family. She usually avoided strangers, but this man seemed fascinated by her. He asked questions about her. He watched her closely. I remember him reaching toward her, and Mercedes reacting in a way I had never seen before. She hissed, she swatted, she backed away, fur puffed up, clearly distressed. That alone was unsettling. Mercedes was not an aggressive cat. She tolerated being handled by kids. She never lashed out without reason. Seeing her react like that made my stomach twist. The man eventually left after finishing whatever business he had with my parents. Once he was gone, the mood in the house shifted. At dinner that night, everyone admitted they had felt uncomfortable around him. Even my parents, who were usually rational and level-headed, agreed that something about him had put them on edge. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. That same night, Mercedes became violently ill. At first, we thought she had eaten something she shouldn't have, but it got worse fast. She started vomiting large amounts of thick, black substance that looked like tar. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. It didn't look like food. It didn't look normal. We took her to the local vet, but they couldn't explain what was happening. They ran tests, examined her, and came up with nothing. Over the next few days, Mercedes grew weaker. She stopped eating. She barely moved. In her final moments, something happened that still haunts me. She started swatting at the air, hissing and growling at something that wasn't there. Her eyes tracked something we couldn't see. She was clearly afraid. I remember the exact moment she died. I remember the room feeling colder. I remember the silence afterward. And I remember the chill that ran through me when she took her last breath. Even as a child, I knew something about it felt wrong. After Mercedes died, strange things started happening in our house. At first, they were small, easy to explain away. We would find footprints in the snow outside that appeared out of nowhere and then just stopped. No trail leading to them, no trail leaving, just footprints that didn't make sense. We heard noises at night, scratching, thumping, sounds of movement when no one was awake. Then it escalated. Wallpaper would be torn halfway off the walls for no clear reason, not peeled gently, torn, jagged, as if something had grabbed it and ripped it down. We couldn't explain how it happened. Doors would be left open when we knew we had closed them. Objects would be moved. Things would go missing and then reappear in strange places. My mother changed during this time. She had always been a bit sensitive, emotionally and intuitively. She felt things deeply, but after everything started happening, she became withdrawn. She was anxious all the time. She watched from corners or doorways. She watched from corners or doorways. She didn't talk about it much, especially not around us kids, but I could tell she was terrified. This wasn't someone enjoying attention or exaggerating. She was genuinely distressed. Around this same time, my health started to decline. I had asthma as a child, but it had been under control for a long while. I hadn't had a serious attack in years. Then suddenly the attacks came back. They were worse than before, more frequent, harder to control. Doctors couldn't explain why it was suddenly flaring up again. One night I was particularly sick. I couldn't breathe properly and my chest hurt. My parents decided it would be best if I slept in their room so my mother could keep an eye on me. I laid down on the floor next to her side of the bed. Their bedroom was cluttered at the time. Under the bed and around the room were boxes full of things we hadn't stored away yet. Old photos, wrapping paper, random household items. Nothing unusual, just things that needed to be moved eventually. That night, I had one of the worst asthma attacks of my life. I remember struggling to breathe. I remember feeling dizzy. I remember fear setting in as my lungs refused to cooperate. Then I heard my mother scream. She woke up suddenly and shouted, "Get away from her!" Her voice was full of panic and rage. She jumped out of bed and tried to get to me, but she couldn't. Every box that had been scattered under and around the bed was now stacked in a solid wall between where I lay on the floor and her side of the bed. That wall hadn't been there before. There was no logical way it could have formed on its own. No time, no sound of boxes being moved, no explanation. My mother tried to climb over them, knocking them aside desperately. She finally reached me and gave me my inhaler. I remember her hands shaking as she helped me breathe again. Once I was stable, she collapsed next to me and cried for the rest of the night. She never told me what she saw. I asked her later, years later, but she always avoided the question. She would change the subject or say she didn't want to talk about it. I know she saw something, though. Her reaction was too intense to be imagined. That scream still echoes in my mind. Say, after that night, the activity in the house continued for months. We tried everything. We had the house blessed. We prayed. We spoke to religious leaders. We looked for logical explanations. Nothing worked at first. Things continued to happen, though slowly. They began to ease. The sounds became less frequent. The disturbances less intense. Eventually, it stopped altogether. We moved on. Years passed. I grew up. I became skeptical. I learned to question things. I learned about psychology, stress, suggestion, and how fear can shape perception. I told myself that what we experienced was grief, coincidence, imagination, and stress feeding off each other in an isolated environment. That explanation works most days, but there are still moments when it doesn't. My brother and his family live in that house now. They've mentioned hearing strange sounds from time to time, footsteps, knocks, unexplained noises, nothing violent, nothing extreme, nothing like what happened during that winter, just enough to remind me of everything we went through. I don't believe in demons the way movies portray them. I don't believe in curses or evil magic in a dramatic sense, and I don't truly believe that a mysterious man came to our home and intentionally caused everything that followed. But I also can't fully explain what happened. I can't explain Mercedes' illness. I can't explain the timing. I can't explain the footprints, the ripped wallpaper, or the boxes stacking themselves into a barrier. I can't explain my mother's terror, or the way she screamed that night. And I can't explain why all of it faded only after we tried to push it away as hard as possible. So I tell myself it was all in our heads. I tell myself it was stress, grief, fear, and coincidence lining up in the worst way possible. I tell myself that because it's the only explanation that lets me sleep at night. Still, every now and then, I think about that man in black, his interest in our cat, the way the house felt after he left, and the way everything changed so suddenly. And no matter how skeptical I try to be, a small part of me wonders if sometimes things happen that don't fit neatly into reason, things that leave marks, even if we spend the rest of our lives pretending they didn't. That winter never truly left me. I just learned how to live as if it had. I've never really talked about this much, mostly because when I try to explain it out loud, it sounds disjointed and hard to follow. Even writing it now, I'm not sure how to make it sound coherent, because none of it ever made sense to me in the moment either. All I know is that strange things have happened on the farm where my family lives, and no matter how much time passes, those memories still sit with me. This first thing happened when my family had gone on vacation, and I stayed behind. I don't remember exactly why I didn't go with them, just that I had the place to myself for a bit. I was sitting in the living room late at night, playing Xbox, enjoying the quiet. Living out in the middle of the country, you get used to silence. There aren't streetlights, no traffic noise, no neighbors nearby. At night, everything feels bigger and darker, but also calm. At some point while I was playing, I heard a noise outside. It wasn't loud at first, just enough to make me pause the game and listen. When you live out in the country, you pay attention to sounds. Animals move around all the time. Coyotes, deer, raccoons. But this didn't sound like that. Before I could really think it through, I heard a horn blaring. It was my mom's Camaro. The horn was going off non-stop, loud and sharp, echoing across the farm. My heart immediately started pounding. No one should have been there. Everyone was gone. My first thought was that someone had broken onto the property. We live far enough out that if someone shows up, it's usually not by accident. I grabbed my revolver. I didn't really think about it. I just reacted. I walked outside toward the driveway where the car was parked. The horn was still blaring when I got close enough to see inside. No one was in the car. The driver's seat was empty. No doors were open. No one was around. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the horn stopped. Just like that. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. It felt thick, like the air had changed. I stood there for a moment staring at the car, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the battery was acting up. Maybe something shorted out. I tried to tell myself there was a logical explanation, but I didn't like it. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get back inside. I remember thinking very clearly, nope, fuck this. I turned around and went back into the house, locking the door behind me. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw something move. It ran through the house. I didn't get a clear look at it. It was fast, low, and gone almost as soon as I registered it. But it wasn't small like a mouse or a cat. It was bigger than anything that should have been inside the house. My adrenaline spiked, and without really thinking, I chased it. I followed it through the house, heart pounding, every sense on high alert, until it stopped short at the sliding glass door. The door was closed, locked. Whatever I had seen hadn't opened it. There was no sound of it hitting the glass, no sign it had tried to get out. 1 second there was movement, the next there was nothing. No shape, no shadow. Just an empty room and my reflection in the glass. That was enough for me. I didn't stay there another minute. I grabbed what I needed, got in my car, and left. I stayed at a friend's house for the rest of the week. I didn't care how inconvenient it was or how ridiculous it might sound. I was not sleeping alone in that house. That wasn't the only time something strange happened either. Another incident took place when I was staying at my grandparents' house, which is also on the same farm. The land has been in my family for a long time. My house, my grandparents' house, and other buildings are all spread across the same property. Whatever is out there doesn't seem tied to just one structure. That night, my grandparents had gone to bed early, and I stayed up in the living room watching a series of unfortunate events. I was stretched out in a recliner, lights low, volume turned down so I wouldn't wake anyone. At some point, I must have fallen asleep without realizing it. I woke up suddenly around 3 in the morning. The house was quiet, the TV was still on, but it had gone back to the DVD menu, the screen looping silently with the sound turned way down. That alone felt unsettling, the way screens look in the dark when nothing else is moving. Then I heard it. A scream. It was a woman's scream, and it was brutal, blood-curdling, the kind of scream that doesn't sound like someone being startled or angry, but like someone in absolute terror or pain. It felt like it cut straight through me. I remember my chest tightening and my stomach dropping. It didn't sound like it was coming from the TV. It didn't sound like it was inside the house, but it didn't sound far away either. It was close enough that it felt personal, like it was happening just outside. I didn't investigate. I didn't call out. I got the fuck out of there. I ran straight to my grandma and woke her up, probably sounding half crazy as I tried to explain what I heard. She didn't dismiss me. She got up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked outside to look around. There was nothing. No one. No movement. No sound. The night was completely still. No neighbors screaming, no animals making noise, nothing that could explain it. We went back inside, and that was that. No explanation, no resolution. That house has its own history of strange things. My grandparents have both seen things over the years, not shadows or vague feelings, but figures. They have talked about seeing a little girl and an older woman from time to time. They don't see them constantly. It's not an everyday occurrence. It's random, unpredictable. The older woman, my grandpa, actually recognizes. There's an old house in the woods next to their place, or what's left of one. It's barely standing now, half collapsed and overtaken by nature. Years ago, an older woman lived there. My grandpa remembers her clearly. When he was younger and would get sick, she used to take care of him. She was kind to him, watched over him, helped him when he needed it. That same woman is the one they see. What's strange is that she usually only shows up when my grandpa is sick, not when he's healthy, not when everything is normal. It's like she appears when he's vulnerable, the same way she did when he was younger. They don't feel afraid when they see her. It's more like surprise, confusion, a sense of recognition. She doesn't speak, she doesn't approach. She just appears, and then she's gone. The little girl is different. They don't recognize her at all. They don't know who she is or where she would have come from. She doesn't match any family history that they're aware of. She's just there sometimes, briefly, and then gone again. No one knows what to make of it. What ties all of this together is the land. My house and my grandparents' house sit on the same farm, the same ground, the same woods, the same long stretches of darkness at night. Whatever strange things happen don't seem confined to one place. They move, they echo, they repeat in different ways. I know how all of this sounds. I know there are explanations people can throw out. Electrical issues, animals, dreams, stress, sleep paralysis, hallucinations, memory filling in gaps. I've thought about all of that. I've tried to rationalize it, especially as I've gotten older. But there are moments that don't fit. The car horn going off with no one inside. The thing running through the house without opening a door. The scream that didn't belong to anything living nearby. The figures that show up at specific times tied to specific people and conditions. What makes it harder to ignore is that these stories don't come from just me. They come from my grandparents too, from different times, different ages, different mindsets. We didn't all sit down and convince each other of something. These things just happened, and later we realized we had shared experiences tied to the same place. Weird shit happens on that farm. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's something supernatural, psychological, or just a long string of coincidences stacked on top of each other in the worst way possible. All I know is that I trust my instincts now more than I used to. When something feels wrong, I listen. When a place doesn't feel safe, I leave. Because every time I ignored that feeling on that land, something happened that I couldn't explain. Even now, writing this, I get that same tight feeling in my chest. That awareness that some places carry stories whether we want them to or not. And that farm has more stories than I'll probably ever fully understand. I've been told this story so many times over the years that it almost feels like a memory of my own, even though I was very young when it happened. Some parts I remember clearly, others I only know because my parents filled in the gaps later. What never changes is the feeling that comes with it. Even now, thinking about it makes my chest feel tight. It's one of those moments that shows you how quickly normal life can turn into something terrifying. I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time. It was Christmas, and my parents and I were visiting my aunt. We had just immigrated to Canada, and our own place wasn't ready yet, so we were staying with her temporarily. Everything about that time felt new to me. New country, new surroundings, new routines. I was still trying to understand where we were and why everything felt different. My aunt had recently divorced her husband. He was originally from Czechoslovakia and had a reputation for being hot-headed even before the divorce. After they split up, things got worse. According to the adults, he had started to spiral. He was angry, unstable, and unpredictable. Over the days leading up to Christmas, he had been calling the house repeatedly, threatening my aunt. He would shout, make vague promises about showing up, and say things that scared her. But up until that night, nothing had actually happened. No one had shown up. No windows broken. No confrontation in person. Because of that, there was this uneasy tension in the house, but also a sense of denial. People tend to hope that threats are just words, that someone is just venting, that it won't really turn into action. That night, we were all inside. It was cold outside. Quiet in that way winter nights often are. I don't remember exactly what I was doing at the time. Probably playing with a toy or sitting near my parents. The house felt normal as it could under the circumstances. My aunt was sitting in the den. Suddenly, everything changed. She looked up toward the front of the house and saw someone approaching. It took her a second to register what she was seeing, and then she screamed. Not a startled scream, not a surprised one, a full panicked scream that instantly made everyone's blood run cold. She saw her ex-husband coming toward the house. He was carrying a hunting rifle. I don't remember seeing him myself. What I remember is the sound of my aunt screaming and the sudden chaos that followed. The mood in the house flipped instantly from uneasy calm to pure fear. Adults started shouting. My heart was racing even though I didn't fully understand what was happening yet. My dad didn't hesitate. To this day, people talk about what he did next, like it was something out of a movie. But it wasn't dramatic or heroic in a flashy way. It was fast, focused, and terrifyingly serious. He moved like someone who knew there was no time to think. He slammed and locked the door as quickly as he could. He grabbed me, my aunt, and my mom, and pushed us toward the stairs. He was shouting for us to move, to go, to hurry. There was no arguing, no confusion. We ran upstairs as fast as we could. Once we were in one of the rooms, he locked the door and told us to stay there no matter what we heard. My mom and aunt were shaking. I remember my mom's hands trembling as she pulled me close. They dragged a dresser in front of the door, pushing it with all their strength, blocking the entrance as best they could. Then my dad did something that still amazes me. He grabbed a buck knife, and he went back downstairs. I didn't see that part, but I remember the moment he turned away from us. I remember realizing he wasn't coming with us. I remember the fear of knowing he was going toward the danger instead of away from it. After that, most of what I know comes from what I was told later. My mom called the police from the upstairs phone. Her voice was shaking as she tried to explain what was happening. She told them there was a man with a gun trying to break into the house. She told them there were children inside. Downstairs, my aunt's ex didn't stop. He forced his way into the house. Somewhere near the front entrance, close to where my dad was hiding, the door was busted open. The sound of it was loud enough that we could hear it upstairs. Wood cracking, something heavy slamming. I remember covering my ears. I remember my aunt crying quietly. I remember my mom holding me so tight it almost hurt. Then there were sounds that are hard to describe. Yelling, grunting, crashes, the unmistakable sound of a fight. My dad jumped him. From what I've been told, the moment my aunt's ex came inside, my dad attacked. There was no warning, no shouting, just impact. They got into a brutal fist fight right there in the foyer. My aunt's ex dropped the rifle early on when he was hit. That's one of the few details everyone agrees on. The gun hit the floor and skidded away. Well, what happened with the knife is something my dad has never confirmed. To this day, if you ask him directly whether he stabbed the guy or not, he won't answer. He changes the subject. He goes quiet. All anyone knows for sure is that the fight was violent and intense. Based on the screams we heard upstairs, it was not a small scuffle. It sounded like rage, fear, and desperation colliding all at once. Upstairs, time felt frozen. We could hear everything, but we couldn't see anything. That might have been the worst part. Not knowing what was happening, only that something terrible was unfolding below us. I remember my aunt rocking back and forth. I remember my mom whispering to me that everything would be okay, even though her voice didn't sound like she believed it. Eventually, we heard sirens. Stormed the house and took control of the situation. My aunt's ex was arrested. The rifle was secured. The immediate danger was over. But that wasn't the end of it. When the police did a sweep of the property, they found someone else. My aunt's ex-husband's father. He was hiding in the backyard. He was an old man, known to be abusive, a heavy drinker, and someone who absolutely hated my aunt. The police found him waiting out there with a knife, not wandering, not confused, waiting. He had been positioned there in case any of us tried to escape through the back of the house. That realization is what still makes my blood run cold. If we had panicked and run outside instead of upstairs, we would have run straight into him. He was waiting for that, hoping for it. The police arrested him as well. After everything settled, the full weight of what had almost happened began to sink in. This wasn't just a man making threats. This was a coordinated attempt to trap people inside a house. One man forcing his way in with a gun, another waiting outside with a knife. It wasn't about scaring people, it was about control, and possibly much worse. The aftermath stretched on for years. My aunt's ex went to jail and was given a restraining order that lasted a long time. His father was deported. Even after all of that, my aunt's ex continued to claim that they had only wanted to scare people, that it was a misunderstanding, that no one was really supposed to get hurt. No one believed that. You don't bring a rifle to someone's house at night if you only want to scare them. You don't hide an armed accomplice in the backyard by accident. As a kid, I didn't fully understand everything right away. It took years for the story to settle into my mind properly. As I got older, the fear grew in a different way. When you're young, you're scared because things are loud and confusing. When you're older, you're scared because you understand how close it all came to ending very differently. What stands out most to me now is my dad. The fact that he didn't hesitate, that he locked us away and then went back down there alone, armed with nothing but a knife and his own determination. The fact that he faced someone with a gun and didn't back down. Whatever happened in that foyer, by whatever choices he made in those moments, one thing is clear: we survived because of him. I don't need to know whether he used the knife or not. I don't need details. All I know is that he did what he had to do to protect his family, and based on the screams we heard and the injuries the other guy had, it's clear my dad didn't hold back. To this day, we are safe. That night left a mark on everyone involved. It changed how my aunt viewed relationships. It changed how my parents thought about safety. It changed how my dad carries himself, even now. And even though I was young, it shaped me too. It taught me how quickly things can turn violent and how important it is to take threats seriously. Christmas is supposed to be a time of warmth, family, and comfort. For us, that Christmas became something else entirely. A reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself politely. Sometimes it shows up at your door with a weapon. Every time this story is told, there's a moment of silence at the end. Not because anyone wants to dramatize it, but because everyone knows how close we came, how easily it could have gone the other way. And every single time, the same thought comes back. If it wasn't for my dad's bravery, I might not be here telling this story at all. This isn't really a scary story in the traditional sense, and I know that on the surface it sounds like the kind of thing you could easily explain away. I've tried to do that myself more times than I can count, but no matter how I turn it over in my head, there are parts of it that simply don't add up. Even now, years later, it still bothers me in a quiet, lingering way. The details are a bit hazy, and I'll be honest about that from the start. I had been drinking a lot that night. But what makes this so unsettling to me is that even with the gaps, the core of what happened feels solid. It doesn't feel like a dream. It doesn't feel like a blackout in the usual way. It feels like something that happened to me and then ended without any explanation. This took place in Toronto. I had gone down there for a concert with some friends. It was one of those nights where everything revolves around drinking. Pre-drinks, drinks at the venue, drinks afterward. I was very intoxicated, no question about it. I had been drunk in public before, arrested before, even spent time in the drunk tank before. None of that was new to me, which is important, because what happened next did not feel familiar at all. At some point after the concert, I got stopped by the police. I don't remember exactly where I was when it happened. Just that I was outside and clearly in no shape to be taking care of myself. They told me I was being arrested for public intoxication and that they were taking me to the drunk tank. That didn't worry me. I remember feeling annoyed more than scared. In my head, it was just another night that ended badly, another story I'd laugh about later. Well, one detail that stood out even then was the car. It was an unmarked car. That's not unheard of, I know. Police use unmarked vehicles all the time. At the moment, I didn't think much of it. I was too drunk to really question anything. I was put in the back seat, the door closed, and we started driving. Somewhere along the way, I passed out. That part is completely normal. I've blacked out in the back of police cars before. I don't remember how long we were driving. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour for all I know. When I woke up, the car had stopped. They woke me up and told me to get out. We were not at a police station, at least not one that looked anything like any police station I'd ever seen. The building we were parked outside of looked more like a warehouse, industrial, plain, no obvious signage that I could see. No front desk visible from the entrance. Just a big, functional-looking building that didn't give off drunk tank vibes at all. Again, I didn't panic. That's one of the strangest parts to me now. Even when things started to feel off, I didn't feel fear in the moment. I was so intoxicated that everything felt slightly disconnected, like I was watching myself go through the motions. I assumed maybe Toronto just processed drunk people differently. Bigger city, different systems, right? We went inside. The interior didn't look like a police facility either. It looked more like a hospital. Bright lights, clean floors, the kind of sterile smell you associate with medical buildings, white walls, people in scrubs or uniforms that looked medical, not police. The officers who brought me in handed me off to these people and then left. That's another detail that sticks with me. They didn't stay. They didn't walk me to a cell or fill out paperwork in front of me. They just left me there. After that, things get stranger. People who looked like nurses or medical staff started taking blood from me. Not just a small vial or two like you'd expect. It felt like a lot. More than I had ever had taken for a blood test. I remember watching the tubes fill and thinking, vaguely, that it seemed excessive, but I was too drunk to really care or protest. At no point did anyone explain what was happening. No one told me why they were taking blood. No one asked for consent in any way I can remember. No one said I was being medically evaluated or treated for alcohol poisoning. They just did it, calmly and efficiently, like this was routine. Still, I wasn't worried. That's what really messes with me. Even now, I can't fully explain why I didn't feel alarmed at that stage. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe my brain was too slow to catch up. Maybe I trusted the situation because it looked official and clean and controlled. Eventually, they led me into what looked like a bedroom, not a cell, not a holding area, a bedroom, a bed, plain walls, dimmer lighting. I assumed this was where I was supposed to sleep it off. That made sense. Hospitals have beds. Drunk tanks have benches or mattresses. This was close enough that my mind accepted it. Then everything shifted again. A large guy, like a bouncer or security guard, suddenly grabbed me. There was no warning, no explanation. He slammed me down onto the floor, then threw me onto the bed. I remember being confused and suddenly angry, asking what the hell was going on. Before I could really react, he started strapping me down. There were a lot of straps, 7 or 8 at least, across my chest, arms, legs. They were tight, professional, like restraints you'd see in a psychiatric ward or in a movie, not something you'd expect for a drunk guy sleeping it off. Then he left. The room went dark, pitch black. I was alone, strapped to a bed, unable to move. That's when panic finally hit me. I started yelling, thrashing as much as I could against the restraints, my heart racing. All the alcohol in the world couldn't dull that feeling. It was raw fear, the kind that comes when you realize you have no control over your body or your situation. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Time is impossible to judge when you're drunk, panicking, and in the dark. Minutes could have been hours. At some point, either from exhaustion, alcohol, or something else, I passed out again. This is where the story crosses from strange into something I genuinely cannot explain. I woke up in bushes, not in a bed, not in a building, not in a cell or hospital room. Bushes. It was daytime or early morning, I'm not sure which. I was lying beside a Burger King. Just there, on the ground. No one around me, no explanation. I checked myself immediately. I hadn't been robbed. I still had my phone. I still had my wallet. There was still $15 in it. My clothes were intact. I didn't feel especially injured, just hungover, disoriented, and deeply confused. There was no sign of restraints. No marks that I noticed at the time, though I can't swear to that. No paperwork, no bracelet, no discharge form. So nothing to indicate I had been anywhere official at all. I sat there for a long time, trying to piece together what had happened. Had I wandered off on my own? Had I been released and stumbled away without remembering? Had my brain invented part of the night? Those are all possibilities, and I've considered them over and over. But none of them fully explain it. If I had been in the drunk tank, I would have woken up there. If I had been in a hospital, there would have been records, or at least a bracelet. If I had wandered off, why do I remember being strapped down? Why do I remember the blood being taken? Why does it feel different from every other blackout I've ever had? My friends think I was drugged. That's the explanation they always come back to. That someone slipped something into my drink, that it caused hallucinations. Memory gaps and panic. I don't completely rule that out. It's possible. It happens to people. But even that explanation feels incomplete to me. I've been blackout drunk before. I've had nights I don't remember. This didn't feel like that. It felt linear. It felt like one event leading to another, even if the details were blurry. It felt like something interrupted my normal understanding of how the world works, and then dropped me back into it without explanation. What really gets to me is the setting. The unmarked car, the warehouse-like building, the hospital interior, the amount of blood taken, the restraints, the fact that no one explained anything at any point. And then waking up outside, untouched, with my belongings, as if I had simply been returned. I've tried to look things up. I've tried to find similar stories. I've tried to see if there are facilities in Toronto that handle intoxicated people in that way. I've never found anything that matches exactly. Maybe it was a detox facility. Maybe it was some sort of temporary medical holding area. Maybe I was so drunk that my memory stitched together unrelated pieces into something more sinister. But then why do I remember the fear so clearly? Why does the image of being strapped to that bed in the dark still make my chest tighten when I think about it? I don't tell this story to scare people. I don't even know what conclusion to draw from it. I'm not claiming I was abducted or experimented on or anything like that. I don't have proof. I don't have answers. All I have is the memory of waking up somewhere I shouldn't have been after a night that followed rules until it suddenly didn't. To this day, when I think about it, I feel this low-level unease. Not terror, just confusion mixed with distrust. It made me realize how fragile our sense of control really is. How easily you can slip into a situation where you don't know who's in charge, what's happening to your body, or how you'll get back. Most nights end badly because of bad decisions. This one ended with a question mark that I've never been able to erase. And maybe that's the part that bothers me the most, not knowing. This is the only experience I've ever had that truly, deeply unsettled me. And what makes it worse is that it happened in the middle of the day. No darkness, no late hour, no obvious reason for my brain to play tricks on me. Just a normal afternoon that suddenly felt very wrong. It was 2009 and I was home visiting my parents during a break from college. They had moved into a new house the year after I left for school, so this was still relatively unfamiliar territory for me. The house itself wasn't old or run down. In fact, it was much bigger than the one I grew up in. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a 2-car garage, a clean, modern place in a quiet neighborhood. Still, from the first time I stayed there, something about it made me uneasy. I could never put my finger on why. It didn't look creepy. Nothing bad had ever happened there. It just had a feeling that I didn't like, a kind of emptiness that felt heavier than it should have. I shrugged it off as discomfort with change. After all, it wasn't really my house. I hadn't grown up there. That seemed like explanation enough. That day, both of my parents were at work. I was alone in the house, which didn't bother me at all. I spent the morning doing nothing in particular and eventually laid down on the living room couch, downstairs to take a nap. It was around 1 in the afternoon. Bright daylight poured in through the windows. The TV was on, low, providing that soft background noise that makes it easy to fall asleep. I'm a fairly heavy sleeper, especially during naps. So when I woke up suddenly, it immediately caught my attention. What woke me was the sound of a doorknob jiggling upstairs. Not a gentle movement, not a single click. It was the unmistakable sound of someone trying to open a locked door. In this house, the bedroom and bathroom doors had those push-and-turn doorknobs, the kind that lock easily if you're not used to them. My dad, in particular, had locked himself into the bathroom more than once after they moved in, completely confused about how the knobs worked. It had happened enough times that it was almost a running joke, so my half-asleep brain immediately went there. I assumed my dad had come home from work for lunch or a quick break, locked himself into the bathroom again, and was now trying to get out. His job was only about a 10-minute drive away, so it wasn't unusual for him to stop by the house during the day. Still groggy? Now I sat up on the couch and listened. The jiggling stopped. I waited a moment, then figured I'd go upstairs and help him out before he got too frustrated. As I walked upstairs, I started to wake up more fully. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no other sounds. I checked the bathroom door first. It wasn't locked. I checked the bedrooms. All the doors upstairs were wide open. No one was there. Not my dad, not my mom. No sign that anyone had been in the house at all. That's when the unease crept in. I stood there for a moment, scanning the hallway, trying to reconcile what I had just heard with what I was seeing. The logical part of my brain kicked in and started offering explanations. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe I was between sleep and wakefulness, and my brain filled in a sound. Maybe the house settled and made a noise that just happened to sound like a doorknob. It was unsettling, but not enough to panic. I went back downstairs, telling myself it was nothing. I turned the TV back on and laid down on the couch again. Within minutes, I drifted back to sleep. Then it happened again. This time, I woke up instantly, fully alert. The doorknob upstairs was jiggling violently. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a faint noise or something I could explain away. It was loud, aggressive, persistent, loud enough that it cut through the white noise of the TV. It sounded exactly like someone desperately trying to open a locked door. My heart started pounding. I didn't move right away. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. The sound continued for a few seconds and then stopped abruptly. Every hair on my body felt like it was standing on end. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my dad. Straight to voicemail, then my mom. She answered. I asked her, trying to sound casual but failing, if either of them had come home early. She said no, they were both still at work. That's when the fear really set in. I hung up and sat there in silence. I turned the TV off. The house felt impossibly quiet, like it was holding its breath. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. My mind started racing through possibilities. Someone breaking in, someone hiding upstairs, someone messing with me. I thought about going upstairs to check again, and then I decided absolutely not. There was no reason for me to investigate. Nothing good could come from walking toward whatever had made that sound. Not every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, so I did. I grabbed my keys, didn't bother turning anything off or locking up properly, and got the hell out of the house. I don't even remember if I looked back as I left. I just remember the overwhelming need to be anywhere else. It's strange to think about now because nothing actually happened to me. I didn't see anything. No one chased me. No door slammed shut behind me. There was no dramatic ending, but that was the only time in my life I've felt that level of fear in broad daylight, in the middle of a quiet, normal Saturday afternoon. Even now, years later, I can still remember exactly how that doorknob sounded and how wrong it felt. This is one of those memories that I still struggle to talk about, not because it's complicated, but because of how real it felt. Even now, years later, I can picture it clearly. I can remember the room, the light, the exact position I was lying in, and the feeling in my chest when I realized I wasn't alone. Whether it was something paranormal or just my mind doing something strange while half asleep, it remains the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. 6 years ago, when I was 19, I was staying the night at my two best friends' house. We were extremely close back then, the kind of friends who practically lived at each other's places. That night wasn't special in any way. No scary movies, no drinking, no talking about ghosts or anything like that. It was just a normal night, hanging out, laughing, and eventually falling asleep. All three of us were sleeping on the same bed. It wasn't unusual. The room was small, but we had done it plenty of times before. I remember feeling safe when I fell asleep, comfortable, surrounded by people I trusted. There was nothing in my mind that would have led me to imagine something frightening. At some point in the night, I woke up. I don't know what woke me. There was no loud noise, no movement, no reason I could identify. I just suddenly became aware that I was awake. My eyes opened, and at first, everything felt normal. The room was quiet, the air felt still. My friends were both asleep beside me, breathing softly. Then I looked toward the foot of the bed. There was a girl standing there. She looked to be around 6 or 7 years old. She wasn't transparent or glowing or anything dramatic like that. She looked solid, real, like a normal child standing in a bedroom at night. She was just there, facing us, watching. I remember my entire body going completely rigid. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even blink properly. Fear flooded through me so fast it felt like my heart might burst. Every instinct told me that something was horribly wrong. This wasn't a dream in the way dreams usually feel. There was no distortion, no fuzziness, no sense of unreality. Everything was sharp, clear, quiet. The girl didn't smile, she didn't frown, she didn't move toward us or away from us. She just stood there, looking at us, not aggressively, not kindly, just watching. I remember thinking that I should wake my friends. I remember trying to will my body to move, to scream, to do anything. But I couldn't. I was frozen in place, staring back at her. Time felt strange in that moment. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been seconds or minutes. It felt endless. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I wondered if someone was playing a joke, but that made no sense. There was no way a child could have gotten into the house without anyone noticing. And even if someone had, why would they just stand there in silence? The girl never made a sound. Eventually, something even stranger happened. She started to fade, not suddenly, not like she vanished in an instant. It was slow, gradual, like a photograph losing contrast, or fog thinning out. Her outline became softer, less defined, until she was just gone. One moment she was there, the next, My friends were waking up, stretching. My friends were waking up, stretching, talking like nothing had happened. I felt sick. I spent the entire morning quiet, replaying the experience in my head over and over. I questioned everything. Was I dreaming? Was I half asleep? Could it have been sleep paralysis? I tried to convince myself that my mind had played a trick on me, that I had been in that strange in-between state where dreams feel real. But even as I told myself that, something didn't fit. I've had vivid dreams before. I've had nightmares. I've even experienced sleep paralysis once in my life. This wasn't like any of those things. In sleep paralysis, there's usually pressure, a panic, a sense of being trapped, often accompanied by distorted or shadowy figures. This wasn't distorted. The girl wasn't shadowy. She wasn't threatening in an obvious way. She was just there. That made it worse. I didn't tell my friends. Not that day, not that week, not even that month. I kept it to myself for a long time because I couldn't fully accept it myself. I figured that if I was struggling to believe what I had seen, there was no way they would. I didn't want to sound crazy. I didn't want to scare them unnecessarily. And part of me hoped that if I didn't talk about it, it would start to feel less real. It didn't. Months went by, and the memory never faded. It stayed vivid, like a picture burned into my mind. I would think about it late at night, especially when I was alone. I would remember the way she looked at us, the silence, the way she faded away. Then one night my friends told me something. They were talking casually, like they were sharing a strange but not life-altering experience. They told me that one night, a while after I had stayed over, they were both in their bedroom when they heard children laughing in the living room. Not the sound of a TV, not muffled voices from outside, children laughing. They said it was clear enough that they both stopped what they were doing and looked at each other confused. There were no children in the house, no neighbors close enough for sound to carry that clearly, no explanation. Curious and a little uneasy, they walked toward their bedroom door to listen more closely. As soon as they reached the door, there was a loud thunk against it. Not a knock, not a scratch, a solid impact. Every closet, every door. The house was empty. They checked every room, every closet, every door. The house was empty. All the doors and windows were still locked. No one was there. When they finished telling me this, I felt cold all over. My heart was pounding just like it had that night. I remember sitting there in silence for a moment, trying to decide whether to say anything. My hands were shaking. I knew in that moment that what I had seen might not have been just in my head. That's when I told them. I told them about the night I woke up and saw a little girl standing at the foot of the bed. I told them how she looked, how she didn't move, how she faded away. I told them how scared I was and how I didn't say anything because I thought I had imagined it. They went completely quiet. They didn't laugh. They didn't joke. They didn't dismiss it. They told me that the description of the girl, the age, and the feeling of the experience made the hair on their arms stand up. They admitted that after hearing laughter in the house that night, neither of them felt comfortable being alone there anymore. We talked about it for a long time. We tried to come up with explanations. Dreams, stress, shared imagination, old house noises. But none of those explanations fully explained everything, especially not the fact that we experienced different things at different times without ever discussing it beforehand. That's the part that still unsettles me the most. If I had told them about the girl first, it would be easy to say their experience was influenced by suggestion, but I didn't. I kept it to myself. Their experience happened independently, and they told me about it without knowing what I had seen. I don't know what I believe. I don't know if what I saw was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely. I don't know if my brain created a perfect image during a half-awake state. I don't know if the house had a history we were unaware of. I don't know if fear and coincidence lined up in the worst possible way. All I know is that it felt real. The fear was real. The memory is real. And the connection between what I experienced and what they experienced is real. To this day, when I think about it, I get that same tight feeling in my chest. That same instinctual fear. It doesn't matter whether it was paranormal or psychological. The impact it had on me was the same. I've never seen anything like that before or since. And honestly, I hope I never do again. The first night I ever spent in Somalia is something that never really left me. It isn't the kind of memory that jumps out at you all the time. It doesn't scream for attention. It sits quietly in the back of your mind, waiting for the right moment to surface. And when it does, it brings with it a feeling that's hard to describe. Not fear exactly, more like a slow, heavy realization that settles in long after the moment itself has passed. We had just arrived, and everything felt unfamiliar. The air, the silence, the way the darkness seemed thicker than it should have been. We were tasked with setting up a temporary camp, and the location chosen was the embassy golf course. On paper, it probably sounded like a decent spot. Open land, some existing infrastructure, room to maneuver. In reality, it felt exposed and wrong from the moment we got there. There was almost no moon that night. The sky was dark in a way that made depth hard to judge. Shadows bled together. Distances felt deceptive. The perimeter wall around the compound was already damaged, riddled with old artillery holes from earlier fighting. They weren't small gaps either. Some were wide enough that a person could slip through without much effort. Every one of them was a vulnerability. We wired the holes as best we could. Tripwires, makeshift barriers, anything to slow someone down, or at least give us warning. It was rushed, tense work. Everyone knew that the first night in a new place is when you're most exposed. You don't know the ground. You don't know the patterns. You don't know what's been there before you. After the sun went down, a bulldozer was brought in to dig defensive fighting holes. The machine worked under minimal light, its engine noise echoing unnaturally in the open space. Watching it carve into the earth in near darkness felt surreal. The ground gave way easily in some places, harder in others, and no one questioned why. We were focused on the task, on getting something in place before midnight. I pulled duty on one of those holes a little before midnight. It was supposed to be routine, a few hours on watch, then relief. When the guys I was relieving climbed out, they immediately started complaining about the smell. They weren't joking about it either. They looked genuinely unsettled. They told me the hole smelled bad. Not just unpleasant, but wrong. Like something you couldn't quite place, but didn't want to breathe in for too long. When I climbed down into the fighting hole, I understood instantly what they meant. The smell hit me like a physical thing. It was thick, heavy, and sour. Not the smell of trash or waste, not the smell of fuel or burned metal. It was something organic, something that had been sitting for a long time. It clung to the back of my throat and made my stomach tighten. Every breath felt like a mistake. The hole itself was uncomfortable in every way. The walls were uneven, the ground littered with sharp edges. Jagged rocks pressed into my boots, into my legs, into my side when I tried to settle in. There was no good way to position myself. Every shift of weight brought a new point of pressure, a new scrape. It was impossible to get comfortable, and sleep was out of the question. I remember thinking that the hole felt hostile, like it didn't want us there. I stayed alert through my watch, scanning the darkness beyond the wire, listening for movement. The smell never faded. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger the longer I was there, as if the earth itself was exhaling. I tried not to think about it too much. In a place like that, you learn quickly not to dwell on discomfort. You acknowledge it, then push it aside. Eventually, my shift ended, and I was relieved. I climbed out of the hole, glad to leave that smell behind, glad to stretch my legs and breathe air that didn't feel poisoned. I didn't give the hole another thought after that. At least, not then. I was able to sleep the next morning after night duty. Exhaustion took over quickly, the kind of deep, heavy sleep that comes when your body finally decides it can shut down. When I woke up, the sun was already high. The world looked different in daylight, less threatening, more defined. It's amazing how much darkness can change your perception of a place. I went outside to wash up, trying to shake off the grime and stiffness from the night before. As I did, I noticed a lot of activity near the area where my fighting hole had been. At first, I assumed it was just routine movement, people coming and going, equipment being shifted. Then I got closer. What I saw stopped me cold. The hole I had been in just hours earlier wasn't being reinforced or adjusted. It was being surrounded by civilians, families, loved ones. They weren't shouting or protesting. They were quiet, focused, moving with a purpose that didn't need explanation. They were claiming remains. That's when it hit me. The bulldozer hadn't just dug into empty ground. It had cut through a poorly marked graveyard. The smell from the hole wasn't random. It wasn't stagnant water or decaying vegetation. It was decomposition, human decomposition. The jagged rocks that had been poking into me all night weren't rocks at all. They were bone shards, fragments of people who had been buried there long before we arrived, their resting place torn open in the dark by a machine that didn't know or couldn't afford to care what lay beneath the soil. The families had come as soon as they realized what had happened, drawn by the disturbance, by the exposed earth, by the unmistakable signs that something sacred had been violated. I stood there, washing my face, and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with fatigue. Everything from the night before replayed in my mind. The smell, the way it clung to me, the discomfort, the sense that the hole was wrong. All of it made sense now in a way that I didn't want it to. I thought about how casually I had dismissed it at the time. How quickly you learn to normalize things in that environment. You don't ask too many questions. You don't look too closely unless you have to. You do your job, you keep moving, and you deal with the rest later. But there, in the daylight, with families quietly gathering what they could, it was impossible to ignore. There was no dramatic moment, no confrontation, no speeches, just people doing the grim work of reclaiming what had been disturbed piece by piece. The air was heavy with grief, with resignation, with something older and deeper than anger. I realized then that my first night in Somalia hadn't just been spent on foreign soil, or in a defensive position, or on watch against an unseen enemy. I had spent it in a grave, a place where the dead had been resting long before we arrived, long before any of us knew their names or stories. A place that had been quiet until we tore it open in the dark, unaware of what we were stepping into. That understanding settled over me slowly, and it hasn't really left since. There are plenty of frightening things in war, loud things, violent things, moments that spike your adrenaline and burn themselves into your memory through sheer intensity. But this wasn't like that. This was quieter, heavier, the kind of realization that creeps up on you after the fact and makes you reframe everything you thought you experienced. Even now, when I think about that night, it's not the darkness or the danger that stands out the most. It's the smell, the way the ground felt under my boots, the knowledge learned too late of where I was standing. TLDR doesn't really do it justice, but if I had to sum it up simply, it would be this. My first night in Somalia was spent on watch in a dugout grave, and I didn't know it until morning. I almost didn't share this one because it isn't my own experience, but every time I hear it, My palms start sweating and my eyes well up the same way they always have. Out of all the strange and unsettling things that have happened to me and my family over the years, this story stands out in a very specific way. It doesn't rely on shadows, figures, or sudden scares. It's the kind of fear that creeps in slowly, tightening its grip the longer it goes on, until logic itself starts to feel unreliable. This is my aunt's story, and I want to be clear about that. She is not someone who exaggerates, lies, or looks for attention. She is one of the most grounded, practical people I know. Everything about her life reflects that. She spent decades as a middle school science teacher, and she loved it. Science wasn't just her job, it was her passion. Botany, geology, archaeology, astronomy, chemistry. She loved all of it. She was the kind of teacher who stayed after school to help kids who were struggling and spent her own money on classroom supplies because she wanted her students to be curious about the world. She was also a skeptic by nature. She believed in evidence, in repeatable results, in explanations that could be tested and verified. Even now, when she tells this story, she doesn't claim to know what happened. She doesn't say it was paranormal or supernatural. She just tells it exactly as it occurred, and that's part of what makes it so unsettling. During her years as a teacher, she would attend workshops during the summer that were offered through the school district. These were usually field-based programs designed to give teachers hands-on experience so they could bring real-world science back into their classrooms. One summer, she signed up for a workshop that took place in New Mexico. It involved field studies, site visits, and long days outdoors, examining geological formations and archaeological explanations tied to the region. So she packed her bags and traveled out there with a group of other teachers. They were all adults, professionals, people who were used to planning, schedules, and responsibility. This wasn't a group of teenagers or inexperienced travelers. They stayed at a hotel near Roswell, which already carries a strange reputation, though that wasn't really on anyone's mind at the time. To them, it was just a location, a base camp for their studies. One particular night stands out. It had been an exhausting day. They had spent hours in the heat, walking, examining sites, taking notes, discussing theories, and learning from instructors. By the time they piled into the cars to head back to the hotel, everyone was tired in that deep, bone-level way that makes conversation quiet and movements automatic. It was around midnight, but the hotel wasn't far from where they had been working. They all agreed it was close enough that they didn't need to pull out a map. This was before GPS was a thing. No smartphones, no navigation apps. You either knew the route or you didn't, but they weren't worried. They were confident they remembered the way. As they drove, one thing stuck out. On the side of the road at a four-way stop, there was an old, run-down convenience store. It wasn't anything special. It looked worn, maybe abandoned or barely hanging on. The kind of place you barely notice unless you're paying attention. Someone in the car mentioned that they remembered passing it earlier that day on their way to the field site. Everyone agreed. It became a mental landmark. At the four-way stop, they went straight. The road was dark, quiet, stretching out into the desert night. 10 minutes passed. The conversation was minimal, just tired comments and the hum of the engine. Then they passed the same store. At first, everyone laughed. Someone joked that they must be more tired than they thought. Maybe the store looked similar to another one. Maybe the desert roads were playing tricks on their sense of direction. The sun and exhaustion can do strange things to your memory, after all. No one felt afraid yet. It was just mildly confusing, or even a little funny. They reached the four-way stop again and went straight, confident this time. 10 more minutes passed, and there it was, again. The same store, same building, same position, same worn sign, same lonely presence at the side of the intersection. The laughter this time was more nervous. Someone pointed out that this didn't make sense. Another person suggested maybe they had accidentally turned without realizing it. Still, no one was panicking. They were educated people, rational people. There had to be a simple explanation. At the four-way stop, they decided to change things up. This time, they turned right. The road stretched on, quiet and empty. No other cars, no lights, just darkness and the feeling of distance. 10 minutes later, they passed the store again. This is the point where my aunt says the mood in the car shifted completely. The jokes stopped. The laughter died off. A heavy silence settled in as everyone stared at the building in disbelief. They all knew, without saying it out loud, that something was very wrong. They reached the intersection again. This time, they turned left. They drove. They watched the road. They paid attention to every sign, every curve, every landmark. And once again, they passed the same store, over and over. No matter which direction they took, no matter how carefully they watched the road, no matter how certain they were that they had done something different, the result was always the same. The same four-way stop, the same convenience store, appearing again and again like it was anchored to them, like it was following them instead of the other way around. My aunt says this is when real fear set in. Not screaming panic, not hysteria, but that deep, sinking fear that comes when your understanding of reality starts to crack. Roads don't do this. Geography doesn't work this way. You don't drive in a straight line for 10 minutes and end up in the same place unless something is very wrong. She described it as feeling like she had stepped into the twilight zone, like the store wasn't real at all, but a prop placed there intentionally as part of some massive, terrifying joke, like they were being watched or tested or trapped in a loop they couldn't escape. No one could explain it. No one could point to a map or a sign and say, "Oh, here's the mistake." There were no obvious turns they had missed. No roundabout roads they hadn't noticed. It was just road, intersection, store, again and again. What makes it worse is that this wasn't just one person experiencing it. It wasn't my aunt misremembering or exaggerating. It was an entire group of adults, all seeing the same thing, all reacting in the same way, all unable to explain it. Eventually, somehow, they did make it back to the hotel. My aunt has never been able to clearly explain how. She says that one moment they were driving, tense and silent, and the next, familiar lights appeared in the distance. The hotel came into view like a lifeline. No sudden realization. No aha moment where everything made sense. Just an end to the loop, as suddenly and inexplicably as it had begun. They didn't talk much about it that night. Everyone was shaken and exhaustion eventually took over. In the morning, they discussed it again, trying to reconstruct the route, trying to figure out what had happened. In daylight, everything looked normal. The roads made sense. The store was just a store. There was no obvious explanation for how they could have gotten stuck the way they did. My aunt, the scientist, tried to rationalize it. Maybe fatigue played a role. Maybe the desert roads were laid out in a confusing way. Maybe there were unmarked loops that weren't obvious at night. But even as she says these things, there's always a pause, a hesitation, because none of those explanations fully satisfy what she felt in that car. She says the fear wasn't just about being lost. It was about the feeling that the rules had changed, that for a stretch of time the world wasn't behaving the way it was supposed to. Years later, her voice stays calm. Years later, her voice stays calm. She doesn't dramatize it. She doesn't embellish details. But I can see it in her eyes when she gets to the part about passing the store for the 4th or 5th time. The way her hands tighten slightly, the way she exhales a little slower. It gives me chills every time. Because getting lost is one thing. Taking a wrong turn is one thing. But being trapped in a place that shouldn't exist, repeating the same moment over and over with no explanation, is something else entirely. I don't know what happened to them that night. Neither does my aunt. And maybe that's what makes it so unsettling. The fact that someone who has spent her entire life believing in logic, evidence, and reason still can't fully explain one strange night on a dark New Mexico road, where a single broken-down convenience store became the center of a terrifying loop that made reality itself feel unreliable. Even now, when I think about it, I imagine that store sitting there in the desert, waiting, looking ordinary, harmless, until you pass it once too many times and realize you're not going anywhere at all. These will probably all get buried, but this is one story I've never been able to shake, no matter how many years pass. I've worked a lot of different jobs, seen a lot of strange things, and dealt with people in every possible state of mind. But this experience still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. What makes it worse is that it didn't happen just once, and it didn't happen to just one person. I used to work in a nursing home. It wasn't my first job in healthcare, and it wouldn't be my last, so I wasn't new to the environment. I understood dementia, delirium, hallucinations, sundowning, and all the strange things that can happen when people age or become ill. I was trained to be patient, calm, and rational, and I prided myself on not jumping to conclusions. Nursing homes can be emotionally heavy places, but most of the time, there are explanations for what you see and hear. At least, that's what I believed back then. One day, I was helping a resident get from her room to another part of the building. She was mentally sound, oriented, and generally cooperative. When we reached the elevator, I pressed the button and waited for the doors to open. When they did, she stopped short and refused to move. She wouldn't step inside. I gently encouraged her, thinking maybe she was nervous about elevators or had lost her balance. She shook her head and pulled back slightly. When I asked her what was wrong, she looked genuinely distressed and said she was scared to get on because of the little boy. I asked her what she meant, assuming she was confused or joking. She told me there was a little boy in the elevator and that she didn't like him. I remember smiling awkwardly and trying to reassure her. I told her there was no one there, that it was just us, and that everything was fine. She refused again, clearly frightened. Eventually, we took a different route to where she needed to go, and I chalked it up to anxiety or imagination. People say strange things sometimes. You learn not to dwell on every comment. That might have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A short time later, another resident, a man who lived a few rooms down the hall, came out of his room and stopped me. He seemed irritated, not confused, not frightened, just annoyed. He asked me if I had any candy. I asked him why. He said it was for the little boy. That made me pause. I asked him what little boy he was talking about. He looked at me like I was the strange one and said, "The boy who keeps coming around here. He wants candy." This resident also did not have severe dementia. He had his moments, like many people his age, but he was generally lucid. He could carry a conversation. He knew where he was. And the way he spoke about the boy wasn't dreamy or disorganized. It was casual, like he was talking about another resident or a visitor. At that point, I started to feel uneasy. Two separate residents, close in time, both talking about a little boy. One afraid of him, one annoyed by him. That's not how hallucinations usually line up, but still, I tried to stay rational. I reminded myself that environments like nursing homes can influence people. Stories spread. One comment can plant an idea in another person's mind. Still, something about it bothered me. I decided to ask my mom. My mom was the charge nurse at the facility and had worked there for 13 years. She knew the building inside and out. She knew the residents, the staff, and every strange story that had ever circulated through those halls. If anyone could give me a grounded explanation, it would be her. When I told her what had happened, I expected her to laugh it off or tell me it was nothing new. Instead, she went quiet. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. She said that all through her years working there, residents periodically reported seeing a young boy, not all the time, not every day, but often enough that it had become a pattern. She said it wasn't limited to one wing, one floor, or one group of patients. It happened throughout the facility. What made it stranger was who reported seeing him. Residents with severe dementia described him. Residents with mild cognitive impairment described him. Residents who were fully oriented and mentally sound described him. Different ages, different conditions, different backgrounds. And they all described the same boy. They said he wanted to play. They said he would approach them, talk to them, and try to get their attention. He wasn't described as threatening or malicious, just persistent, curious, childlike. When the facility moved residents to a new building, the boy came with them. That part sent a chill through me. New building, new layout, new rooms, new staff, and still the same reports. The descriptions became even more unsettling when my mom explained what some residents had said, particularly those with limited sight. People who could barely see at all described him in more detail than you would expect. They said he had dark black hair. They said he lived in a tent. And they said he told them he died when a tree fell on him. That detail stuck with me in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't vague. It wasn't symbolic. It was specific. And it was repeated. I asked my mom if anyone had ever looked into it. Old records, history of the land, anything. She said no one had found anything concrete. Most staff members either ignored the stories or treated them as a sad but explainable part of end-of-life care. When people are close to dying, they sometimes see things. Loved ones, memories, hallucinations brought on by changes in the brain. That explanation made sense until what happened next. One night I was working late. I was feeding a resident who had recently suffered a stroke. She had lost the use of her right hand and required total assistance. She couldn't feed herself, couldn't reposition easily, and needed help with almost everything. Mentally, she was present, but physically, she was very weak. The room was quiet, dimly lit, calm in that heavy way that nursing homes often feel at night. I was focused on feeding her slowly, carefully, making sure she swallowed properly. Then I felt it, a cold hand on my arm, not a brush of fabric, not air, not my own movement, a hand. It was cold in a way that didn't feel like skin that had been in a cool room. It was colder than that, sudden, distinct. I froze for just a second, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. Before I could even turn my head, the resident looked at me and smiled slightly. She said, "Is that your boyfriend? He looks a little young for you." I nearly lost it. My heart slammed into my chest. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire. I didn't ask her to repeat herself. I didn't joke. I didn't laugh. I just finished feeding her as calmly as I could. My hands shaking, my mind screaming that this was not okay. She wasn't confused when she said it. She wasn't slurring her words. She wasn't laughing. She was matter-of-fact, observant, like she was commenting on something she could clearly see. I didn't feel the hand again. I didn't turn around. I don't know how I made it through the rest of that shift. That resident passed away that night, I found out later. That detail sealed something in my mind that I've never been able to undo. It could have been coincidence. It could have been timing. But combined with everything else, it felt like a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge. After that, I started paying closer attention. I noticed how often residents would glance toward empty spaces, how they would smile at corners of rooms, how some of them would talk to someone who wasn't there, not in a frantic or distressed way, but calmly, like they were having a normal conversation. The little boy wasn't always mentioned, but when he was, the descriptions never changed. Dark hair, young, playful, wanting attention, and always appearing near the end. I never saw him, not clearly, not directly, and I'm grateful for that. I don't know how I would have handled it if I had, but I felt him that one time, and that was enough. people like to say that death is gentle, that it comes quietly, that it brings comfort. And maybe sometimes it does. But working in a nursing home taught me that there's a lot we don't understand about what happens when people get close to the edge. There's a thin place there between what we know and what we don't. And sometimes things slip through. I don't know if the little boy was a ghost. I don't know if he was a shared hallucination. I don't know if he was something created by the mind to make the process of dying easier. But I know this. Too many people describe the same thing over too many years, in too many places, for me to dismiss it entirely. And I know that the cold hand on my arm felt real. I left that job not long after, not because of fear, exactly, but because it changed how I looked at the world. It made death feel closer, more present, less abstract. Even now, when I think about nursing homes, I don't just think about the residents or the staff. I think about the little boy, and I hope, wherever he is, that he's finally found somewhere safe to play. This is one of those moments that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. Not because of anything supernatural, but because it was very real, very human, and very close to ending badly. Out of all the strange situations I've been in, this one stands out because of how fast it escalated and how powerless we felt once it did. It happened in Cascabel, Arizona. If you've never been there, it's remote in a way that's hard to explain unless you've seen it yourself. Long stretches of empty land, desert scrub, dirt roads that don't feel like they lead anywhere important, and that constant feeling that if something goes wrong, help is not close. Cell service is spotty at best, and you don't just casually stumble across people out there. A few friends and I were exploring the area, doing what people do when they're young and think they're invincible. We weren't vandalizing anything, weren't breaking into buildings, weren't doing anything malicious. We were on land we genuinely believed was government land. No clear signs, no fences, no warnings that stood out. Just open desert. Then we saw him. He came out of nowhere like he had been watching us the whole time. One second it was quiet. The next there was a man walking toward us from the direction of a nearby ranch. He looked exactly like the kind of person your instincts tell you to avoid. Dirty clothes, heavy boots, unkempt beard, and eyes that didn't look curious or annoyed, but angry. Not normal, get off my property, angry. Something sharper. Before any of us could even explain ourselves, he raised a shotgun, not pointed at the ground. Joke. Every bit of confidence we had, every bit of confidence we had vanished in that moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a man with a gun deciding what to do with us. He started yelling about trespassing, about how we shouldn't be there, about how people like us didn't listen. His voice was unhinged, bouncing between rage and something almost excited. We tried to explain that we thought it was government land, that we weren't trying to cause trouble, that we'd leave immediately. He didn't lower the gun. That's when we really started noticing our surroundings. Behind him, surrounding the ranch, were things that didn't belong anywhere near a normal property. Bones. Not just a few animal bones scattered naturally, but piles of them, bleached white in the sun, too many to ignore. Old abandoned cars rusted and half sunk into the ground, like they had been dragged there and forgotten. And then the fence. Hanging all along the fence were license plates. Not one or two, dozens, from all over the country, different states, different styles, different years, just nailed up there like trophies. My brain immediately went to a very dark place. You don't collect that many license plates by accident, and you don't decorate your property with bones and abandoned vehicles unless you want people to feel uncomfortable. Then I noticed his shirt. It had dried blood on it. Not a little smear, not something that looked old and faded. Enough that it stood out immediately once you saw it. I remember staring at it and thinking that this was the point where things could go very, very wrong. Every horror movie cliché ran through my head at once. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jeepers Creepers, that feeling of being far from anywhere safe, face to face with someone who didn't seem bound by normal rules. Someone who knew the land, knew there were no witnesses, and clearly wasn't afraid to use fear as a weapon. We didn't argue. We didn't make sudden movements. We didn't look him in the eyes too long. We did exactly what he told us to do. Slowly backed away, hands visible, apologizing over and over, promising we'd leave and never come back. Eventually, after what felt like forever, he lowered the shotgun just enough to gesture us away. He kept watching us the entire time we retreated, didn't turn his back, didn't stop glaring. The closed and the engine was on. The closed and the engine was on. The adrenaline hit all at once, hands shaking, voices cracking, that nervous laughter people get when they realize how close they just came to something awful. No one said much. We just drove, quietly, away from Cascabel. To this day, I don't know if he was bluffing or if we were seconds away from becoming another story no one ever fully explains. I don't know whose land it really was, and honestly, I don't care. What I do know is that some places carry a kind of danger that doesn't announce itself with warning signs or fences. Sometimes it announces itself with a shotgun, a blood-stained shirt, and a fence full of license plates that make you realize how small you really are. And sometimes you're lucky enough to walk away from it. It didn't happen to me directly, but it happened to my mom when she was a teenager. And it's one of those stories that never loses its power, no matter how many times I hear it. My mom is in her mid-60s now. She's not an overly religious person. She doesn't read the Bible regularly, doesn't preach, and doesn't go to church much at all. But she does pray every night, quietly, because it gives her comfort. That detail matters because she's not the kind of person who exaggerates spiritual things or looks for demons in every shadow. Growing up, I watched plenty of spooky movies with her, normal horror stuff. Ghosts, suspense, creepy atmospheres, nothing extremely graphic, nothing too wild. She was fine with that, but there were always two hard lines she would never cross. The first was possession or exorcism movies. I remember one day I asked her if she wanted to watch The Exorcist. She didn't hesitate for even a second. She flat out refused. Not a nervous laugh, not a maybe later, a solid, absolute no. She said there was no way she would ever watch anything involving possession or exorcisms, ever. I thought that was strange, but I didn't push it. Later on, when the movie Constantine came out, I showed her the trailer, thinking it might be different enough. She watched for a moment, then as soon as the scene came up, where the girl crawls on the ceiling, she shut it down immediately. Same reaction, same refusal, end of discussion. The second hard line was Ouija boards. My mom would completely lose it if anyone even joked about bringing one into her house. I'm not exaggerating. She would yell, scream, curse, and shut the conversation down instantly. She made it very clear that no Ouija board would ever be allowed anywhere near her home. Not even as a joke, not even for Halloween, nothing. That kind of reaction sticks with you. So eventually, when I was older, I asked her why. I asked her what happened that made her react so strongly to those things. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was calm but serious in a way I didn't hear often. And then she told me the story. She was a teenager, staying over at a friend's house for a sleepover. It was a normal night. A few friends hanging out, laughing, talking, playing games. The parents were home, sitting in the living room watching TV. Nothing felt strange or unsafe. It was just a regular house, a regular family, a regular night. At some point, my mom and her friends were sitting on the floor playing a board game. My mom noticed that the board looked strange, but she had never seen one like it before. She didn't know what it was or what it did. Nobody explained it to her in detail. They just said it was a game. That game was a Ouija board. They started using it casually like bored teenagers do, asking silly questions, laughing when nothing happened. My mom didn't even fully understand what they were doing at first. She just followed along, hands on the planchette like everyone else. Eventually, the board started moving. They asked if there was a spirit in the house, and the planchette answered yes. That alone made things a little tense, but they brushed it off. Someone joked that one of them was pushing it. Someone else laughed nervously. Then they asked the spirit to show itself. Nothing happened. So they asked again, and again, and then they demanded it to show itself. That was the moment my mom said she felt something change. She didn't know how to explain it back then, but she knew instantly that they had crossed a line. Before anyone could react or say anything else, every single light in the house went out at the same time. Not just the room they were in, every room. The TV shut off. The house went completely dark. And then, just as suddenly, everything came back on. Lights, TV, everything. The parents were confused but assumed it was a power flicker. My mom tried to convince herself of the same thing. It was scary, sure, but things like that can happen. Maybe it was just bad timing. They continued. The next question they asked was simple. Who are you? This time, the planchette moved differently. It wasn't small or shaky. It moved in wide, deliberate circles around the board, almost like it was building momentum. Slowly, it stopped on the letter D. Then it moved again. E, then V, then I, then L, devil. My mom said the room went silent. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody joked. A few of the kids pulled their hands back, but the planchette stayed in place. Someone tried to say that one of them must be messing around, but no one admitted to it. Trying to regain control of the situation, someone said, "If you're the devil, then show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the TV shut off. The screen went black. But instead of just seeing their own reflections, everyone in the room could see something else reflected in the dark glass. Sitting there, right next to them. My mom says she can't fully describe it, even now, just a shape, a presence, something that didn't belong. The air in the room turned icy cold so fast, it felt like someone had opened a freezer. Even the parents noticed it. This wasn't something only the kids experienced. Then the noises started. In the kitchen, loud banging and crashing sounds erupted out of nowhere. Objects flew off the top of the refrigerator. Cupboards slammed open and shut violently. Dishes rattled. It sounded like someone was tearing the room apart. That was it. They didn't ask another question. They didn't try to reason with it. They didn't say goodbye properly. They slammed the board shut, grabbed it, and threw it straight into the trash. Nobody argued, nobody protested. They never touched a Ouija board again. Eventually, things calmed down. The noises stopped. The cold faded. The night continued, but no one slept well. Later that night, my mom was asleep in her sleeping bag when she was multiple dogs growling and snarling. Multiple dogs growling and snarling, running back and forth above her head. She tried to convince herself it was outside, maybe dogs in the neighborhood, maybe something on the ground, but it didn't sound distant. It sounded like it was directly on the roof. She stayed awake until morning. When she finally got up, she asked her friends' parents if any of their neighbors had dogs. They told her no, there were no dogs nearby. Then they told her something that made her blood run cold. They had heard it too. They had also heard chains and dogs moving across the roof that night. That was the end of it. No more discussion, no more games. Life moved on. But my mom never forgot what happened. She truly believes that night they invited something evil into that house. That it wasn't a joke. That it wasn't imagination. That whatever answered them was real. and it sat there with them, watching. That's why she refuses to watch possession movies. That's why she will not allow a Ouija board anywhere near her home. And that's why every single time she tells this story, I get an uncontrollable cold shiver running down my spine, because my mom is not the type of person to make something like this up. And because when she talks about it, she doesn't sound scared anymore. She sounds certain. This isn't something that happened to me directly, but it's one of those stories that stuck to my family like a shadow. It's been told and retold over the years, and every single time my dad talks about it, his voice changes just a little. He doesn't dramatize it. He doesn't embellish. He just states it the way it happened, and somehow that makes it worse. It's also the reason he absolutely refuses to watch anything related to possession, exorcisms, or spiritual warfare. And honestly, I don't blame him. This happened during my dad's younger years, back when he was spending time in New Mexico. He's not a superstitious person. He's practical, grounded, the kind of guy who believes there's an explanation for most things. But even he admits there are moments in life that don't sit right, the moments that leave a mark whether you want them to or not. This was one of those moments. One of his friends had broken his arm. I don't remember all the details of how it happened, just that it was a bad break, the kind that swells, twists wrong, and clearly needs medical attention. But for reasons I never fully understood, whether it was money, location, or local influence, his friend didn't go to a hospital. Instead, he went to what my dad described as a witch doctor type of guy, a local healer, someone known in the area for fixing injuries through methods that weren't exactly medical. My dad said at the time none of them really knew what to think about it. They were young, curious, and maybe a little reckless. When their friend came back claiming his arm had been fixed, they were skeptical but also curious. The arm looked better. Later, my dad and a few other friends went to visit him. The moment they walked into the house, something felt off. My dad has described that feeling many times, and it's always the same description. Not fear, not panic, just a deep, uncomfortable wrongness. Like the air was heavier than it should be. Like your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up with yet. He said it felt exactly like that cold chill you get when something brushes too close to you in the dark, or when you hear a story that makes the hair on your arms stand up without knowing why. No one said anything at first, but they all felt it. The room felt cold, even though it wasn't. Quiet, but not peaceful. Trying to shake the feeling, telling jokes, talking like normal. But none of it worked. My dad said it was like whatever had been done to fix the arm had left something behind, something that didn't belong. Eventually, someone suggested that their friend get a blessing, a proper one, a local ecclesiastical leader, someone respected in the community, someone tied to the church. Whether it was said seriously or half-jokingly at first, it stuck. And for reasons my dad still can't fully explain, their friend agreed. The blessing happened not long after. My dad wasn't present for every detail, but he was close enough to witness what followed. The local religious leader prayed over his friend. Simple prayers. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no spectacle, just words spoken calmly, deliberately. And then it happened. Right there, on the spot, the friend's arm rebroke. Not slowly, not from movement or strain. It broke as if the original injury had never healed at all. The pain came back instantly, bone out of place, shock, screaming, panic. Whatever had been holding that arm together failed in an instant. My dad said the room erupted into chaos. People shouting, someone grabbing the arm, someone else calling for help. But underneath all of that, there was this overwhelming sense of confirmation, like something had been undone, like whatever force had been involved didn't belong there and couldn't stay once it was confronted. The friend ended up needing proper medical treatment after that. A hospital, doctors, casts, the normal expected path. And from what I understand, his arm eventually healed the right way. But none of them were the same after that. My dad said the feeling in that house vanished after the blessing. That heavy, cold, spine-crawling sensation was gone. But the memory of it stayed. The realization that something unnatural might have been involved, something that could fix and then destroy so completely, shook him deeply. He doesn't talk about demons. He doesn't claim to know what it was. He doesn't preach or warn or try to convince anyone. He just knows how it felt, and he knows what he saw. That's why, to this day, he won't watch movies about possession or exorcism. He won't entertain conversations about witchcraft or spiritual experimentation. He doesn't laugh it off. He shuts it down quietly and firmly. When I asked him once why it affected him so much, he just said, "Some things aren't meant to be messed with." And every time I think about that story, about an arm being fixed and then breaking again the moment a blessing was spoken, I get that same cold feeling he described. The kind that starts in your chest and crawls up your spine. The kind that doesn't need proof to feel real. Whether it was coincidence, psychological, or something far darker, I don't know. But I understand now why my father refuses to look too closely at that edge of things. Some doors, once opened, don't close the way you expect them to. This happened just this past summer, and even now, thinking about it, makes my chest feel tight in a way I don't really know how to explain. I didn't go into that job expecting anything strange. I wasn't looking for ghosts or signs or anything like that. I was just trying to get some work experience and make it through the summer. I was working in a closed-down asylum. Officially, my job was boring, very boring, bureaucratic stuff. Filing, sorting, archiving old records, the kind of work where hours pass quietly and you don't really think much about where you are. The buildings weren't being used for patients anymore, but a lot of departments still stored old materials there. It was cheap space, out of the way, and forgotten by most people. At the time, I was an undergrad studying sociology, so being in a place like that naturally made me curious. When you're surrounded by old hallways, locked rooms, peeling paint, and outdated signage, it's hard not to wonder about the people who used to live there. I started reading up on the history of the asylum in my free time. Nothing obsessive, just casual research. Old articles, archived reports, stories about reforms, closures, and scandals. One article in particular stuck with me. It was about a woman whose son had been admitted to the asylum in the 1970s. He was young. From what I remember, he wasn't violent, just struggling. The article focused on the mother's fear that her son would be mistreated if he went in. She had begged, argued, and fought against his admission. According to the article, part of what pushed him over the edge was that fear. Fear of being locked away. Fear of being abused or ignored. He ended up killing himself while he was a patient there. The article wasn't graphic, but it was emotional. The mother was quoted extensively. Her grief came through clearly, even decades later. She blamed the system. She blamed the people who worked there. She blamed herself. I remember closing my laptop afterward and just sitting there for a minute, feeling heavy. Still, I didn't think much of it beyond that. Sad story, tragic but not uncommon for institutions like that. A few weeks later, I had a dream. It wasn't like a normal dream where things shift and blur. It was extremely clear, extremely focused. In the dream, I was sitting across from an old woman. She was crying, but not quietly. She was screaming at me, yelling about how awful I was, how disgusting it was that I worked in that place. Her face was twisted with grief and rage, and she never looked away from me. She just stared, screamed, cried, and accused me over and over. It felt like it lasted all night. I woke up shaken, my heart racing, my body tense. The image of her face stuck with me long after I woke up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something wrong, even though logically I knew it was just a dream. I didn't immediately connect it to the article, but something about it felt familiar in a way I didn't like. I tried to brush it off. A few days later, I was back at work. That day, me and the other intern were assigned to work in the basement of one of the old buildings. The basement was where a lot of the archived medical records of deceased patients were stored. The place was massive and maze-like. Long corridors, flickering fluorescent lights, cold concrete floors. Every sound echoed slightly, making it hard to tell where anything was coming from. The records were stored in different rooms, and all of them were locked. Each room had been repurposed over the years. Some had clearly once been patient rooms. You could still see where beds would have been, where call buttons used to hang. Others had been storage areas. One large room had once been a cafeteria, and one room, which we didn't realize at first, had been used to prepare bodies before they were taken to the morgue. That day we were filing records room by room. Quiet work, just the sound of paper, footsteps, and keys jangling. At one point we went to open a door to put a record away. The other intern put the key into the lock and tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. She tried again and again. She stood there for a good minute, jiggling the key, applying pressure, muttering under her breath about old locks and crappy keys. I stood beside her, waiting. While she was struggling with the lock, something strange happened. Out of nowhere, I got this vivid image in my head. Not a thought exactly, more like a sudden knowing. I saw a young man inside the room. He was hanging. His body was still. His face was pale. And I had this overwhelming sense that he didn't want us to come in, that he was holding the door shut. The feeling was strong enough that I almost stepped back. Right as that image hit me, the key turned. The lock clicked, and the door opened. Neither of us said anything. We walked in, placed the records where they belonged, and walked back out in silence. I don't know if the other intern felt anything. I never asked. The air felt heavy in that room, but we didn't linger. We just did what we needed to do and left. Later that day, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the dream, about the article, about that sudden image, about how specific it felt. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also couldn't deny how unsettled I was. Other things happened during that internship, things that bothered me deeply, even if they didn't seem supernatural on the surface. The way some records were labeled, the casual language used to describe deaths. The moment we realized one of the record rooms used to be the body prep room, not because of a sign, but because of details in the files and the layout of the space. That realization alone messed me up more than I expected. But what stuck with me the most was the feeling that the woman and her son were somehow connected to me. That by reading that article, by working there, by touching those records, I had crossed into something personal, something raw. I don't claim that I was haunted. I don't know if it was guilt, imagination, empathy, or something else entirely. But I swear that dream didn't feel random, and that moment at the locked door didn't feel like nothing. It felt like grief lingering in a place that had seen too much of it. Like anger that never found a place to go, like people who never felt heard, still wanting to be acknowledged. I finished the internship. I moved on with my life. But every once in a while, I still think about that woman screaming at me in my dream, and that silent image of a young man behind a locked door. And no matter how hard I try to rationalize it, part of me still feels like they were getting to me, not to scare me, but to be remembered. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. No ads interrupted that, because you asked, and I listened. But keeping this alive takes more than most people realize. Your support, however small, is what keeps the darkness going. Link in description, bio, and first comment. There are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late. Subscribe to Shadow Archives, and if this meant something to you, you already know what to do.